Hey, it's Kay, and this is Skittles, Campaign Coordinator. We are in a historic moment. A pandemic has compromised the economies of major powers across the world, and a recession was already beginning to hit before that pandemic came to give it a firm kick over the edge. Capital's inability to deal with a crisis of this magnitude is leaving an enormous vacuum that in some places is being filled by the authoritarianism of the ruling class made manifest. Fascism. You know, it wasn't so long ago that there was a feeling that we may have been in a very different historic moment. The US and UK were mirroring each other for a few years as insurgent left-wing movements shook the foundations of electoral politics. In the UK, with an unprecedented win, Jeremy Corbyn and his platform of nationalisation, bolstering social services and strengthening the rights of the working class, delivered the best result the previously stagnating Labour Party had come up with since around the turn of the century. The Blairite right wing of the party had consistently failed to capture people's interests after Blair himself set the stage for the era of austerity and expanded imperialism that the Tories have gleefully dug us deeper into. And it was looking like a path to actually improving society somewhat had opened up right before our eyes. Likewise, after losing the primary to the would-be second addition to the Clinton political dynasty, who would go on to lose to Trump in no small part because she transparently represented an establishment governed by corporate interests that Trump managed to maintain a false narrative that he did not represent. Come the next Democratic primary, Bernie was surging. It was looking like people had learned the lessons of 2016, and getting behind a candidate whose only selling point was "at least I'm not Trump," it just didn't sound like a plausible strategy to win in November. Each of these two countries had moments of genuine hope, of the possibility of a movement backed by the working class actually making some gains. Even if they were relatively small gains over a ruling class who has been grinding us into dust for generations, especially in the wake of the 2008 crash, which basically ended any possibility of much of my generation ever owning a home or existing without debt. There was hope. And then they lost. Corbyn and Sanders, despite running on incredibly popular platforms, despite energizing a base of people who had been totally alienated from politics up until that point, despite running against deeply incompetent opponents who wore their disdain for the people on their sleeves, they lost. More precisely, we lost, and that includes you, even if you voted for the Tories or you're gonna vote for Biden. Because when November rolls around, you and yours still won't have universal healthcare. You'll still be living in a country that can't even begin to seriously tackle the looming climate crisis or the current health crisis. And you can sneer at Labour because your big 8-boy won, but it's your NHS that's being stripped down and sold off. It's the health of you and your loved ones that's put at risk by our government's refusal to take COVID-19 seriously. Your guy might have won, but you sure as fuck didn't. Both Sanders and Corbyn's defeats have been accompanied by a chorus of liberals, insisting that they were just too radical, ignoring, of course, the popularity of their platforms, and insisting the only way to win is to do, well, the only thing liberals really know how to do: cede ground to the right. So, people got behind Joe Biden, primed for a repeat of the exact same mistakes that lost them 2016. With a somehow even shittier candidate. Likewise, the Labour membership, helped along by a last-minute influx of new members who I'm sure had the best of intentions, elected a new leader who represents the same corporate-approved Blairite politics that was losing Labour elections long before anyone knew who Jeremy Corbyn was. After seeing multiple Labour centrists fail and watching the Lib Dem party collapse in on itself, along with the MPs who left Labour to pursue more capitalist-friendly centrist politics, all losing their seats, Starmer and his cabinet, filled with some of the worst people on the Labour right, probably aren't going to get anywhere near power. And so, one historic moment passed us by to be replaced by another. The DNC would rather endlessly replicate the conditions that led to Trump's victory than cede ground to the left. The Labour Party would sooner repeat the approach that began privatization, pulled us into the Iraq War, and set the stage for a decade of Tory austerity than cede ground to the left. And more importantly, the most right-wing elements of these political institutions are backed by the media, where the left simply is not. Corbyn and his supporters were smeared as anti-Semites, terrorists, and Soviet spies, all while having to fight an internal civil war in the Labour Party against the right wing of the party, who would do everything they possibly could to subvert the overwhelming preference of the party membership and maintain a status quo that everybody fucking hates. Sanders faced the same treatment, the media even going so far as to attack him as divisive because some of his supporters are mean on the internet. For anyone who grew up with the internet, the idea of one specific group of people being singled out as the only ones being mean online is madness. Doubly so for anyone who's had the misfortune of interacting with some of the more enthusiastic Kamala Harris supporters, or the newly primed legion of rape apologists who will happily act like any Republican when a woman comes out about a sexual assault if it means defending their guy. And while the media had time to make sure everyone was worried about snake emojis, the sexual assault allegations against Biden, the presumed nominee, just weren't given much care. More than anything, though, the greatest narrative the media whipped up around Bernie and Corbyn is that they couldn't succeed. If you tell people again and again and again that their candidate can't win, and even if he does, he will fail at everything he tries to do, people will start to internalize that, whatever the reality may be. People like to think that they are uniquely immune to propaganda, and that includes you and me. No matter how aware of it we try to be, no matter how many questions we ask, nobody is immune. But the more you trust institutions like TV news networks, the less opportunities you have to be critical of the narratives that are being shoved down your throat. And the Dem base is horrifyingly trusting of the mainstream media. A lot of this is in response to Trump's attacks on the media, popularizing terms like fake news for networks that are inconvenient to him. But the danger in this is that every single major news network, whether Trump likes them or hates them, is owned by enormous corporations which are led by people who, every single one of them, have the same class interest. There is an incredibly prevalent narrative that there are left-wing and right-wing major news outlets, that CNN and Fox are inherently opposed, but they aren't. They might take slightly different perspectives on how to defend the class interests of the people who literally own all of these networks and papers, but they are the same interests. None of these are owned by and working in the interest of working class people. Most of the media is owned by billionaires. And we've seen the reality of that class interest manifest in broad daylight as every channel and every paper and every pundit joined together in one voice to oppose the working class-supported Corbyn and Sanders campaigns. Let's be clear, Corbyn and Sanders were not bringing revolution. They were not bringing an end to capitalism. It is crucial to understand that what these mouthpieces of capitalist interests united to stop was not a radical anti-capitalist program. It was simply a slightly kinder form of capitalism, one that sought to develop infrastructure for capitalist development whilst providing for the basic needs of a population who had suffered for over a decade under crushing austerity. The campaigns run by Sanders and Corbyn showed the extent of the capitalist commitment to "there is no alternative." For the ruling class to unite so strongly against revolutionaries, well, that would be expected. But to do so against the relatively mild and extremely popular reforms of candidates like Corbyn and Sanders shows that they are unwilling to budge even an inch, not even to avoid mass unrest. We're seeing that unwillingness to cede ground massively limiting the ability of our governments to respond to the ongoing coronavirus crisis. They'd rather thousands of us die than take a hit to their profits. 15 years ago, it was a common sentiment that politics doesn't really matter because politicians, they're all the same. And if we're being honest, that's been true. The difference between most Democrats and Republicans, between many Labour and Tory MPs, it's mostly a matter of tone and aesthetic if you're poor. Hell, some people can't help themselves, and they frequently declare that they actually want what the other guys want. But in the past few years, we watched real movements for change spring up from the incredible hunger for something better that is felt throughout our society, gain immense support, and run headfirst into the wall of the media apparatus and the internal defense mechanisms in their own parties, designed to maintain the status quo. Look, we gave electoralism a truly magnificent attempt. We ran candidates who were genuinely good people with popular ideas and bulletproof histories of consistently sticking to their guns, in stark contrast to the controlled opposition of candidates like Warren, who decided this year they were going to be progressive, and who knows what they'll be next year. And in even starker contrast to the soulless centrist ghouls who tell their corporate donors nothing will fundamentally change, and shout down normal people who dare to question them. But it didn't matter. Where there were no dark histories of supporting segregation or war crimes, dark histories were fabricated. A meeting to discuss a peaceful resolution to Israel's occupation of Palestine became sympathizing with terrorists. Even though the Tories have long been good buds with the actually terroristic Saudi royal family who are still perpetrating a genocide in Yemen, decades spent standing up for working people in a party that despises working people turned into Bernie's not a team player and he gets nothing done. While these narratives were still being spewed, he fought and won to get millions of gig economy workers included in a coronavirus bailout bill just after the Dems compromised the sick leave bill into a nearly worthless piece of paper. We ran people who have consistently been on the right side of history, on manifestos that spoke to people's immediate material needs, and we still lost. It's time to come to terms with the fact that we will not be permitted to make the changes we need to make to create a society that can withstand pandemics like these, make poverty a thing of the past, and actually exist on this planet in the long term without making it fucking unlivable. We cannot do any of this at the ballot box. As the Democrats and the Labour Party both hurtle headlong into oblivion with deeply unpopular centrist candidates, there will be elements within those parties encouraging the left to stay on board and desperately fight against the party infrastructure designed to keep them out. But we just don't have time for that shit. We haven't even begun to feel the real effects of this recession, compounded by a health crisis that we aren't handling well at all. As if climate disaster wasn't enough of a ticking clock, we don't have time to play these games of wait and see for another 4 years just to play a perfect game and still lose because the system is rigged against us. And information itself is controlled and distorted by the class who has every interest in keeping us from making even the slightest gains. In fact, how sure are you that the election results we see are even accurate? These political institutions include some of the most powerful people on the planet. Why would you trust them? The voter suppression in the form of massive wait times to vote, and nearly all stations closing down in major cities during a pandemic, the massive discrepancies between results and exit polls, as well as whatever the fuck happened with Iowa, it should be more than enough to call the Democratic primary into question. And earlier this month, a report was released containing chat logs of senior staff within Labour actively organizing against Corbyn for the 2017 election. An election so close that just over 2,000 votes spread among a few marginal seats would have been the difference between a Labour victory. These saboteurs took funds out of marginal seats to ensure co-conspirators like Tom Watson kept their seats. That's gonna have to be its own video. The Labour Party and the DNC have proven there is no depth they will not sink to in order to prevent us winning. Corbyn and Sanders were the compromise, and the olive branch was refused. It's time to get serious about non-electoral politics. Now, things like direct action and mutual aid, or just the vaguely referred to organizing, are probably things you've heard thrown around before, but you might not be sure where to start. So, I'd like to make a suggestion. This is not going to be a comprehensive how to organize, but I do provide a lot of resources to that end in my previous video about the coronavirus. This is just something I want you to think about. Remember earlier when I mentioned Democrats are incredibly trusting of mainstream media? Republicans aren't. Even though the political interests of the Republican Party are fairly well represented in a lot of mainstream media, their supporters are increasingly getting their news from other, even more right-wing sites like Breitbart, that are, of course, still funded by extremely wealthy people, and even Fox News, which is undeniably mainstream media, brands itself as not like the other guys to appeal to this base. The right is constructing their own alternative media network which peddles the exact same pro-capitalist narrative as the rest of the mainstream media, but it drops the pretense of political correctness, allowing people on the right to feel like they've found the secret truth tellers who can't be silenced by the PC police, while being told the exact same shit that liberals are eating up on CNN. The thing is, those of us who are socialists, those of us in the working class who are struggling for liberation in a system built upon our exploitation, we can't do that. The further to the right you go, the more boldly you defend the interests of the ruling class, while the further you go into socialist politics, the more you oppose their interests, because you understand that they are contradictory to the interests of the working class. Read most people. So we don't get many billionaires propping up our media outlets. We don't get huge production budgets and mainstream support. You didn't think a set like this was bought with YouTube ad revenue, did you? But we have one thing, maybe the only thing that they don't have. Each other. We can't build a huge multi-million-dollar media apparatus to control the narrative like they can, but we can build connections with each other. Every channel is telling people in your neighborhood right now that they are helpless, and better things just aren't possible. Show them why that's not true. Talk to them. Work with them to solve a problem in your community. Their real, lived experience will open their eyes to the fact that they're being lied to, but only if they experience solidarity. Only if they see human beings helping human beings for no reason other than the fact that they are human. We need to show each other, prove to each other, that governments and companies won't save us. We save us. So many people are doing brilliant work already, organizing rent strikes in their buildings, making crisis kits for people most affected by the pandemic, giving legal advice for people whose landlords are trying to illegally evict them, and preparing to resist those evictions physically. It can be overwhelming to think about all the fronts there are to fight on. I get it. So start small. I challenge you to do one thing today. One simple act of solidarity with another human being. Go ask your neighbor if they need anything. There's a pandemic happening right now. Shops are being cleared out and people are scared. Just knock on their door and ask if they need anything. Maybe you've got toilet paper to spare. Maybe they're older or immunocompromised. You can offer to pick something up for them so they don't have to go outside and risk their lives. When one person does something for another, for no personal gain, for no profit, that interaction is antithetical to the market logic that dominates capitalist society. And all of us have the capacity to do it, all the time. After speaking to your neighbor, consider putting up a sign with your number, extending that offer to help pick up groceries to any elderly or otherwise vulnerable people in your building or on your block. See if you have a local Food Not Bombs or other food program. Get in touch, because a lot of them are still trying to operate even during this pandemic. People still need to eat, and there are good, experienced people who've been doing this for years. And I'm sure they'd love to have you. Go out there and provide people with the things they need. Build connections with other people in your community. That is how we begin to build something that can't be undone by an election loss, that doesn't require approval from pundits. That's how we create a shared experience that the ghouls working for corporate news networks have no say in. But it all starts with the simplest, smallest act. Go ask your neighbor if they need anything. Right now.